but feel free to chat. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be waiting a couple minutes before we start. In the meantime, me and my colleague Martha are going to be promoting people from attendee to panelists so that you can turn your cameras on and participate in the Q&A session of the lecture. Thank you. We'll just be another couple minutes before we start. Thank you. Okay, I think we can get started. So it is my pleasure to introduce everybody to Matthias J. Becker. Matthias is a long friend of ISGAP, and he's also, let me pull up your bio, the project lead of the Decoding Antisemitism project at the Technical University of Berlin. And he's going to be talking about some of the internet data that's come out since the October 7 massacre. So Matthias, I will pass it on to you.
Okay, thank you so much for this introduction and also for inviting me to your ISGAP series. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, especially in these times when we are witnessing this kind of unleashing of anti-Semitism. So I believe before I get to the findings regarding October 7th, it is not necessary to have a fundamental understanding or basic understanding of the research design of the Decoding Antisemitism project. So I would briefly introduce that and then present the examples that I had in mind in order to exemplify how antisemitism online looks like, how it changed with and after the discourse event of October 7th, the massacre. Just for your information, I was tested positive the other day, so I hope my presentation and role in the discussion won't be affected by this. So sorry for the bad news, but I will give my best. Okay, so the 7th of October and the subsequent events were a profound moment of shock, obviously. And this sentiment resonated deeply with researchers in the field of social media studies, like I am, who have been engaged in research of anti-Semitism online for years. And what we observed online and continue to capture represents a significant turning point, a point that definitely needs articulation, especially at a time when news outlets understandably still prioritize events in the offline world of the Middle East and worldwide. But of course, it is crucial not to overlook the online realm, as the boundaries between online and offline have become increasingly blurred. And also it is clear that much of the international anti-Semitic hatred we recognize these days has been cultivated in online discourse for years. And now with the trigger of October 7th, it is experiencing an unprecedented escalation regarding its frequency, but also the way it is expressed. Without social media and the communication conditions online, such as anonymity, the mutual reinforcement of web users, the emotionalized acceleration of online debates, all that, plus the sheer omnipresence of disinformation, hate speech, and conspiracy theories, events like, let's go a few years back, the shootings in Pittsburgh and Kauai, as well as those in Paris, in Halle, Germany, in London, would have been scarcely possible in the realm of online communication, you have copycat effects, a depiction of the perpetrators as heroes, and the slow but constant normalization of hateful and exclusionary ideas. And the same with the current climate at demonstrations and on UK and US campuses. Therefore, language and communication in general not only serves a representational function, but also has an impact on our thinking, our feeling, our actions. Just think of the historical significance of language and the media in the perpetuation of Jew hatred in Europe over centuries, with Nazi Germany as its climax. Here it was language, propaganda, imagery that were the discursive carriers of those ideas. So while there is nothing new about it, the advent of social media introduced a new interplay. On the one hand, you had anti-Semitism existing throughout history and persisting in collective memory, escalating in certain phases. Then all these ideas about Jews got incorporated into social media discourse, where due to the aggregate state of communication, these ideas get intensified and can reach societal segments that were previously either unreceptive or ignorant of these anti-Semitic tropes. And this in turn reverberates back into the offline world. So you can see kind of a vicious cycle whose worrying consequences constantly increase. The web is not only, I would say, a catalyst when you also think of the way the algorithms work, how they actually allow particularly hate speech to flourish, to be shared, but even as a super individual creator of an anti-Semitism that is socially acceptable, something that could not exist beforehand in that way. Therefore, when it comes to society developments on national, but also on continental or even global scales, the analysis of web discourse is unavoidable and absolutely essential. There's no way around it. And the political arena needed ages to understand this. Social media studies even hold significant advantages over conventional opinion research from previous decades. It's conducted, for instance, through surveys or polls, which could only provide extremely limited snapshots of public opinion, let alone capture latent attitudes. So my focus now shifts towards the inverse direction, viewing language not just as an instrument or a catalyst for attitudes and actions, but as a gateway to the mind, through which one can reconstruct sometimes even unconscious thought patterns, which is what I, as a cognitive linguist, aim to do. And if applied correctly, so I'm talking about social media studies who are able to track down those patterns online. If applied correctly, you could even, to some extent, anticipate how web discourse and with it anti-Semitism evolves in the close future. However, measuring online anti-Semitism is easier said than done, with challenges arising at multiple levels. On the one hand, of course, you have the phenomenon itself, the hate ideology of anti-Semitism, metaphorically described as the chameleon due to its highly adaptable, shape-shifting nature, existing for more than 2,000 years, adapting itself, and therefore present or prevalent in all societal, political, and cultural milieus. And during this long period, different concepts have emerged as building blocks of this hate ideology, like stereotypes, analogies, also self-positionings in forms of affirmation of anti-Semitism, Holocaust distortion, etc. The second challenge would, of course, be the form with which these concepts are communicated or reproduced. So the packaging, let's say. When it comes to communication and anti-Semitism, we must also consider the diachronic dimension to understand anti-Semitism today, so synchronically. So anti-Semitism is not always communicated one-to-one. There are historical reasons for this. There was a global awareness of anti-Semitism, or let's say an awareness in the West with the Holocaust as a rupture in civilization, creating a different awareness of anti-Semitism and the dangers of linguistic or verbal violence, not only in Germany, but internationally. And in German anti-Semitism research, that whole development is described as, or the impact of this process of becoming aware of anti-Semitism is described as communication latency, which means that the anti-Semitic concepts that were kind of a cultural normal over the previous centuries kind of migrated to the private discourse. People couldn't say anymore that Jews control the world or are greedy, but they like publicly, but they just communicated it in private domains. Or if they continue communicating in the same way, the pattern changed. And that's what I'm interested in, how explicit reproductions of stereotypes change, kind of mutate into their implicit forms. And I will talk about this in a second. And of course, the third section, or the challenge, would be the communication space itself, the interactive web, with its incredibly diverse communication architecture, online milieus. You have echo chambers, all these forms that actually make it very, very difficult to measure this kind of development, these trends that accompany anti-Semitism. You have a diversity and density of data. And of course, you have bottom-up processes, not anymore top-down processes as we know it from conventional media, from discourse as it occurred in history, but an online discourse which is very often shaped, diversified, and radicalized by anonymous web users. So this differentiation is extremely crucial, explicit versus implicit anti-Semitism. And that's, I just repeat this because it's crucial also for the slides I will show in a second. Explicit anti-Semitism, just to be on the same page, there you have a one-to-one relationship between the idea or the concept, the mental concept, and the applied language in order to communicate that. And you would have explicit anti-Semitism in forms of like with slurs, for instance, but also direct reproductions of stereotypes, analogies, the patterns I mentioned before. Implicit anti-Semitism, in contrast to that, would mean that there are semantic gaps. There's sometimes detour communication. You don't have that kind of one-to-one relationship. You need different sources, different background knowledge in order to close these gaps. And these sources would be language knowledge, context knowledge, or word knowledge. It's historical knowledge for extrapolating the hidden meaning. To give you a brief understanding of that, this is just a small overview, a tiny part of the forms of implicit anti-Semitic hate speech that we could find online. A lot of examples, I admit that, but you get a pretty good understanding of how you can structure the online discourse following certain suggestions from pragmalinguistics, discourse studies, etc. So the first point would, of course, be semiotic markers, multimodal units where imagery is always involved, or typographic properties. You all probably know or have heard about the three parentheses, Israel putting quotation marks, which would be an implicit way to question its legitimacy. The usage of icons, GIFs, memes. The paraglider icon is becoming very prominent in the discourses we are looking at. Another level would be puns, where the surface of the word is changed, and where the hidden meaning is just communicated based on these changes. So people can use a pun in order to express the idea that the Holocaust is a hoax by just referring to Spielberg's movie in Schindler's List, and just based on small changes on the surface of the word, the idea that the Holocaust is a hoax is communicated implicitly. And then, of course, you see a whole range of examples where Israel as a word is involved. Again, questioning its right to exist, or alleging that Israel is the new Nazi state, etc., etc. But the allusions, the third group, it is a little bit more tricky, because there the words remain intact, but they are put into a context that in the first place might be irritating. For instance, just getting directly to Nazi comparisons. If someone says, there's a final solution of the Palestinian question. People need to know historical knowledge. They need to know about Nazi propaganda in order to close the gaps. What is actually meant here, which is Israel's the neo-Nazi state. Or if you go back to the previous paragraph, this sentence, someone should give Soros a shower, or the Austrian artist was right. In both cases, an allusion saying or leading to the conclusion that Nazi atrocities were actually justified, and with regard to Soros, and in a coded death wish, using an allusion to the gas chambers. So it would take ages to go through all the levels we could find online. I just want to give you a taste of how this kind of work looks like and what we need to take into account in order to have a proper understanding of how anti-Semitism articulates itself. And so this is just the language. This is just the verbal level. Of course, when we talk about web communication, imagery, multimodality is extremely crucial. You probably all heard of the Happy Merchant meme, which is by far the most popular anti-Semitic meme among white supremacists, but not only them. And here you can see the compatibility, the adaptability of this meme in various contexts. With automatic classification, you would have a chance to find that find those forms pretty easily, because the combination of face and hands, etc., is more or less the same over time. But it just gives you an understanding of whatever happens in the present or in the recent past. This kind of understanding of, you know, some deceitful actions in the background can always be applied. And I already mentioned the phenomenon of paragliders after October 7th. Here you can see various examples how they circulated, and not only on Islamist platforms, of course, like probably the most prominent image that you all saw is shared by Black Lives Matter in Chicago on the left-hand side. So the usage of such imagery or multimodal units, as soon as words are also involved, in online communication cannot mean anything else than the approval and celebration of the massacre of October 7th. Since I already mentioned the term of multimodality, I want to give you some more examples where you actually see how important it is to look into the combination of a relationship between words and images. And here you see a couple of examples where, for instance, in the first slide, the idea of a taboo of criticizing Israel is communicated, or there's a visual allusion to the Great White Shark, using also alleged Jewish physiognomy and greed, and of course Holocaust denial. And right now we see all sorts of projections onto the Jewish state, starting with child murder, genocide. Of course, is a term that comes up on a daily basis. Nazi comparisons, and of course, again, playing the anti-Semitism card on the top right, for instance. That is the taboo of criticizing Israel, and below it, the exploitation of the US by a Jewish or Israeli lobby. So I've been working in that field for roughly 10 years now, and the majority of comments I've analyzed online via text or image are of implicit nature in various regards. And this, of course, leads to the conclusion, or to the proverbial tip of the iceberg idiom, a visual metaphor by which I would like to suggest that we still cannot yet recognize the true extent of anti-Semitism online. So we need far more research, despite the fact that the web is the most important platform for political debate. The real dimension of anti-Semitism is still unknown until today, or we just have a proper understanding of the tip of the iceberg. And this actually led to the idea of Decoding Antisemitism as my research project, which started in summer 2020. It will be running till May 2024. So a couple of months are left, and it's funded by the Atlantic Foundation based at TU Berlin. Daphne already mentioned it. And here we have a range of scholars coming together from linguistics, but also media studies, philosophy, history, anti-Semitism studies, obviously, that actually work together, bringing in a comprehensive understanding of Jew hatred, how it occurred in the past, how it occurs today, and trying to understand if it occurs today, in what form does it occur. And of course, you would always need to have an in-depth approach, a qualitative approach to actually understand the full dimension of it. What we are interested in is not so much the anti-Semitism of the alt-right or white supremacy platforms, but mainstream society, because we would say, also when you look at the current escalation and the consequences worldwide, anti-Semitism on campuses, anti-Semitism coming from the left, among artists, it is actually the mainstream, the politically moderate discourse that is a challenge in itself, because as soon as anti-Semitism, the way I presented it 2 minutes ago, in implicit ways, is communicated there, very often there's a lack of sanctioning that, in contrast to, for instance, anti-Semitic tropes uttered by a neo-Nazi, of course. So the mainstream, the elaborate implicit forms of anti-Semitism, in our understanding, particularly for me as a linguist, play a crucial part for the internationalization of anti-Semitism in various political contexts. So that's more or less the focus of the project. We have a whole range of disciplines, as I mentioned before, and we start with a qualitative content analysis using a tool called MaxQDA. And what I mentioned before, and the conceptual level, the stereotypes, analogies, the whole arsenal, as I call it, regarding anti-Semitism is taken into account, how it occurred over the last 2,000 years. And it is annotated or labeled together with the package, the words, the augmentation, the visual material that is applied in order to communicate those ideas in a persuasive fashion. And this is a screenshot of the tool we've been using since summer 2020. You see on the right-hand side an extract of a comment section. On the left-hand side, you see the code system, the categorical system we use. It's roughly consisting of 250 codes or categories, and we always double code the phenomena in order to see over time if there's a change in the way how people express ideas when it comes to Israel, when it comes to Jewish communities in London, whatever it is. If, for instance, people start with very implicit forms and over time there's a normalization of that trope, so that people actually start using not anymore rhetorical questions, but puns or even explicit forms. And in order to, just a brief footnote, in order to not just present it in the context of talks and presentations and workshops, but actually give that also to fellow scholars and civil society, we decided to translate our knowledge and the way we deal with online hate and all its diversity into an open access book, which will be accessible in coming February as an open access document. So published with Palgrave Macmillan, and in each, there are roughly 45 chapters each dedicated to one concept. And you will have lots of examples per phenomenon, per concept, that will help you understand what the difference is between, again, a direct reproduction of the stereotype of greed versus its indirect equivalence. And so it's roughly 350 pages in English with a lot of data sets. And I think it will help shed some light into these gray areas that we are confronted with in our work. The qualitative analysis is just the first step. There are 3 steps in the project. Just to mention it briefly, what we try to do with the annotated data is not just to present the world where we stand at the moment regarding mainstream anti-Semitism, in the countries of interest. Sorry, I didn't mention that the 3 countries we are looking at are the UK, Germany, and France. We are about to expand further, also take into account Spain and Italy and other countries, but I will talk about this in a second. But it is actually used, the annotated data are used in order to train classifiers, large language models, so that they can replicate our decision. And that's what's happening already for 1.5 years now. You can see step 2 on this scheme, and there's kind of a feedback loop between the scholars, between our colleagues in the field of data science and us as scholars from the humanities and social sciences, so that these classifiers step by step get better and better and have more and more accurate results. And then, of course, this will lead to bigger, wider statistical analysis of huge amounts of data sets based on the results from step 1 and step 2. In order to give people regular updates, we publish discourse reports every 6 months. And what we did, for instance, in the second report, we were looking into the escalation phase in May 2021. You can see, I sometimes present also a QR code on the side. Sorry, I didn't mention that at the beginning. When you just scan this, you will be led directly to the publication that will illuminate a little bit further what I mean with these brief insights. And here you can see, based on a qualitative analysis of 4,500 comments at that time on Facebook, you can see the proportions between the 3 countries. And the UK has more anti-Semitism than France and Germany together. And there are various reasons for that. We elaborate on that in the discourse report number 2 that you can download. And the most prominent examples were concepts, anti-Semitic concepts, where Israel representing the fundamental global evil, and of course, historical demonizing analogies, Israel as a Nazi state, Israel as an apartheid state. So this is not very uncommon. Okay, the numbers are surprising with regard to the UK particularly. Again, there are reasons for that. But what is really a big change, what was really a challenge for us and a kind of a turning point, was the examination of the online responses in October 2023. When you look at this slide, and now I open the next one, you will see that the numbers are quite different. They're quite really going in different directions. And again, there are reasons for that. First of all, it needs to be highlighted that there was a significant jump in the number of anti-Semitic comments posted on YouTube and Facebook. So the corpus is also bigger, but still, statistically speaking, we had lots of comment sections, particularly in the UK, but also in France, where the amount of anti-Semitism doubled or even tripled. And a striking aspect in all of this is that it was not the news stories about the retaliations coming from the IDF that led to this amount of anti-Semitism. As soon as we looked into this, we could see a whole range of typical anti-Semitic, anti-Israel projections, like the analogies I mentioned before. But no, in this case, it was actually the media coverage directly related to the footage from Hamas. And those comment sections actually led to this kind of peak of anti-Semitism. And that's pretty interesting. Benny Morris wrote a fascinating piece a couple of weeks ago on the aspect of Jewish weakness and defenselessness in the history of anti-Semitism in the European past. And this kind of defenselessness, when we think of pogroms, anti-Semitic pogroms in Eastern Europe, that it very often also led, like covered by the media, that it also led to anti-Semitic hate in other countries, in other regions of Europe. But this didn't really come up. Like what I can say about social media, there was no clear correlation. So far, it was mainly those statements when you actually think of Israel being presented as, Jews presented as white oppressors. When this stood in the fore, anti-Semitic projections were all over the place. But this now seems to change, or it has changed with regard to October 7th. And therefore, we call it a turning point. something that I have never seen, the Decoding Antisemitism project never saw. And beyond affirmation of the Hamas attacks, there were, of course, also these concepts coming up that we know from last years, like the denial of Israel's right to exist, attributing the sole guilt in the conflict to Israel for the entire history of the conflict, describing Israel as a terrorist state, conspiracy theories, a whole repertoire. Just to give you a few examples, like an affirmation of violence and suggested destruction of Israel. They deserve 60 years of this, not only a day. Then we will have peace. Perhaps, of course, affirmation is very often also uttered straightforward, just with Allahu Akbar or Free Palestine, which below the line of a YouTube clip about how what happened at the Nova Festival can only be understood as an affirmation of or celebration of that kind of violence. Of course, there are also statements like, good job, Palestine, go on, lads, so happy to see justice finally. There's a lot of Schadenfreude when it comes to the festival community, peaceful community, must treat like this everywhere. And you can see lots of examples where you can see that it's not about Israelis only, it's about Jews in general, like this wordplay that you can see here, or again, the allusion I mentioned before, and the allusion to the Austrian painter. And in each comment section I've been analyzing, there is, of course, the October 7th is depicted as a starting point for something that will be brought to the whole West. And other examples are, of course, examples of gloating and misogyny. There are lots of examples related to female victims. That's the price paid for being cute, for instance, was something that came up on a regular basis. They had a good time with her, it seems like. Here, the example I just presented is a reference, again, to denial of Israel's right to exist. It's always the whole land. The third intifada is requested, full independence this time, and sole guilt. So I could go on. There are just many examples, but you can just see how a handful of ideas or concepts are expressed by various linguistic, sometimes visual means. And it's full of, like, there's a lot of lack of empathy, to say the least. Again, gloating, Schadenfreude is all over the place. And always getting back to ideas that Israel actually deserves it, that Israel is actually the new Nazi state. Israelis are presented as Nazis, as Germans, and actually presented themselves as Jews as soon as the Second World War ended, like in this example. Or a very interesting example here, the second one, Israel is doing to Palestinians what they claim Hitler did to them. So this is a Nazi analogy, obviously, but at the same time, based on the term, based on the word claim, it also denies the existence of a Shoah, which is, just two examples, two concepts presented in one example. So I found this pretty interesting. And of course, references to 9/11 continuously, and that the Jews were behind it. They were dancing. And then you see the people from the Nova Festival, which is kind of which triggers memories of the old conspiracy theory. What we do right now is look more and more into Instagram. This is work in progress. So far, you can see the most prominent concepts that we could identify. It really depends on the focus of the Instagram post. And of course, if it's pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, there are lots of different directions the thread can follow. And in the close future, we will look also into TikTok and bring all this together in our last sixth report, which is due mid of February, which will be presented also in Berlin, London, and in Paris in events end of February, where you, on the one hand, you have a long-term analysis with regard to the current escalation, again, throughout various platforms. Then, of course, a contrastive analysis about these similarities, but also discrepancies between May 2021 and today. How did the discourse about Israel change? And what does that say about the future of anti-Israel rhetoric? We will also add more countries. There will be a contrastive analysis about the immediate reactions to October 7th in 5 and maybe even 6 other language communities. And apart from the examination of everything that is related to October 7th, we will also have a range of case studies about Elon Musk. You remember his statements about George Soros a couple of months ago, the ADL issue, and also his statement, when was it, last week? This will also be compared as a second case study that will be presented. Then, since it's the last discourse report in our pilot phase, time flies, we will also give like a bird's eye view of how the project went in the last 3.5 years. We will summarize the results of our workshop series that took place a few weeks ago. And we, of course, will tell you how the large language models work at the moment. And where are the, what are the differences? What are the advantages if you compare it to Google's Perspective API, for instance? So this is just in a nutshell. I'm sorry that it was kind of very, very brief, and I guess there are lots of questions that come up for all these different sections. But so that you have an understanding where the current phase of our case studies is heading, and what we try to understand. Like, as I said, the pilot phase will end. In April next year. What we would love to do, this is still in the clouds, but it looks rather probable that we will get the funding. We will extend the scope. We will take into account also the US and Canada. We will look into the transatlantic dimension or dynamics between Europe and North America. We will, of course, improve the models with regard to various languages, not only English. And we'll also take into account multimodality, so that these models are actually able also to detect imagery, text-image relations. My goal for the next phase would be for instance, when we are confronted with an escalation phase like the current one, that we can use these models, these tools, in order to track down in real time how the discourse changes on different platforms, which is also a security issue, of course, and to actually find more reliable, accurate numbers with all the implications for offline communities, etc. But this is something, of course, which needs to be pursued in the future. Okay. If you find that interesting, please visit our website and have a look at our publications, and maybe also subscribe to our newsletter. We would appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matthias. That was really fascinating, as usual. Really pertinent right now. If anybody would like to ask him a question in person, please raise your virtual hand and I can unmute you and bring you into the chat. But in the meantime, we do have some written questions. So our first question is by, I'll let you know.
I think you had a connection problem right now. I couldn't hear you. Do you mean the question of the anonymous attendee?
No, sorry, I brought Marlene in. If I'm breaking out, Martha, feel free to step in.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, I didn't know it was my turn. Hi, Matthias, how are you?
Hi, long time no see.
Long time no see. And hi, Daphne. I just had a question. So I thought it was interesting that a lot of the reaction were due to media and not to Israel's actions. And so I was wondering what your thoughts are on some of the media's portrayal of what happened on October 7th. And yeah, I'll just leave it there. I can ask, I have like 15 questions related to that, but I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, well, I have to admit, it's not really surprising, given what we saw also in previous years or even decades. It is just an accumulation of everything people knew already about, for instance, the BBC. With our studies, we don't focus so much on like really the coverage. We take that, of course, as a trigger for online discourse. For like our preliminary study that was published 4 weeks ago, we also refer to the whole scandal with the hospital and with the rocket and who was it actually, and it's a scandal, right? It's outrageous, and I really don't know. I mean, for instance, in Germany, there were lots of attempts to deal with that. There were lots of media in the last 10, 15 years who also shared caricatures that were highly problematic. But also the big problem is the structuring of information, like what we see right now, that very often just the media represent everything without any critical thought on it, of what the spokespeople from Hamas are telling the world, and or who is the active part, who actually started this, what is their reaction, what is action, what is reaction in the current phase in the Gaza Strip. And it's something not really surprising. I find it at least positive that to some extent the BBC tried to change the perspective here and there, and to apologize for certain parts. But you know how it is. A media outlet apologizes a few weeks later, but the problem is already out there. You have an authority that you can just refer to, which is also, something what this Hamas spokesperson said the other day, interviewed by Sky Australia, I think, referring to this article in Haaretz that kind of said that it was Israeli helicopters who shot at the festival goers, and it's just circulating like crazy. I would say the media still, and we already had that in previous years. We even had that during the so-called Arab Spring. There's definitely also a movement that standard media are not so much in the center of attention anymore. I mean, it's still the case, but I think we should just take that danger, that threat of disinformation and disinformation, let's call it like this, and compare it also to the stuff influencers share online. And this is also a big problem. And I think we just need to be clear and certain of how we address that in a way that that we can reach out to the bystanders and convince them of what really happened. Sorry, it was not a very concrete answer, but it's a big topic.
Thanks, Matthias. I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you. So maybe we can now move on to the Q&A. The first one's from Anonymous, has asked, do we know the psychological reason for why any anti-group hate should be so emotionally attractive to so many people?
Oh, wow. Well, this is a big question. Like the reason for the success story of anti-Semitism, and there are definitely some theories out there, but I think a very important aspect when we look into the history of anti-Semitism was its stabilizing factor, like the discursively speaking, the stabilizing factor of applying stereotypes, these concepts or these building blocks, as I call it, to the outgroup, and to foster and stabilize actually the in-group. So of course, when we look at the early history of Christianity and how every negative trait, every negative idea that the Christian in-group couldn't identify themselves with was actually projected, to use a psychoanalytical term, and I already referred to projections, are projected onto the Jewish outgroup just to get rid of it and to have that kind of stabilizing factor. I think this is something that makes anti-Semitism very attractive. And given that there is such a diversity of stereotypes, and again, the adaptability with different political, cultural groups makes it actually to a device, transforms it into a device that can be applied in any possible situation, as for instance, the memes I presented proved. And so I would describe it as that. When we look into the history of German nationhood, the German-French War, 1871, anti-Semitism was a building factor for nationhood in Germany. It was not just the external enemies like the French or the Brits. It was, of course, the internal enemy that led to a unification of the German in-group, which was not that like it was not a very peaceful coexistence between the different German regions. But this aspect of bringing together a common enemy and to know that this enemy is to some extent, due to assimilation, invisible, was something very, very powerful for the creation of a positive national self-image or a stabilized national self-image, especially since the German nation state is pretty young. At that time, was pretty young in comparison to other states in Europe. So that's what I could refer to. There are a couple of really interesting articles about this aspect. Also, when we think of the birth hour of modern capitalism and the uncertainties that are related to this, that are connected to this. For instance, Karin Stöckner at the University of Passau, she wrote a couple of really, really interesting pieces about that. And how, again, the stabilizing idea, the possibility to explain the world in the most efficient way, take away all the complexity and just personalize an abstract problem, like, for instance, capitalism or a crisis or a disease in the Middle Ages. So that's another aspect to it, and this is beautifully laid out in her work.
Thank you. Jonathan has asked, how does this, do you think, feed into stopping the spread of online hate?
Well, this is you mean social media studies, I guess. How does this help? Well, I tried to allude to it at the beginning of my talk, and it seems that I wasn't very successful with that. I think the main idea, if the problem with anti-Semitism, people say anti-Semitism has existed for 2,000 years. What can we do? It will always be there, given this kind of shape-shifting nature, the adaptability, etc., etc. And I would say, yeah, that's true. But at the same time, we could see also when you look into the statistical analysis we've conducted so far, or a certain immunity in large parts of German society, I would say there was definitely, to some extent, a success story when it comes to addressing Jew hatred in Germany post-war Germany. The way how re-education took place, the way how people talked about anti-Semitism, not so much about, as the idea of we as Germans talk now about the Jewish outgroup, but the questions that were raised in school classes changed, not in all school classes for sure. I was definitely not that lucky at my time as a student, but there was another way of addressing this the topic, and I would say that also led to the point that the probability that people look at the current escalation in a different way in certain segments of German society is connected to this. So I believe that education helps. It won't eradicate the problem for sure, but it will mitigate it in a good way. But what we need for all this, in order to have powerful tools to address anti-Semitism, not anti-Semitism in the Nazi era or in the Soviet Union, but the way it is communicated today online as the most important platform where young people get socialized, let's say, we first of all need to understand what is happening there. And when I remember in the last 10 years, 8 years, when I also worked together with teachers, the knowledge of how anti-Semitism occurs online was pretty limited, to say the least. But if you want to address Jew hatred, the way it comes up and the concepts that accompany it, as a multiplier, as a teacher, as a part of civil society, you need to understand these patterns. So I think social media studies can really serve as a first very, very powerful step in order to develop counter strategies and the educational work that still do not exist, or not exist in a way that they are implemented nationwide, as an example. And this is just one opportunity or one option we have as social media scholars. If we have good antennas, good ways to measure the phenomenon and to understand the colors, the patterns of anti-Semitism, this can be used in all forms of intervention, right? It's not only education, it's also in the political arena. It can be used in order to raise awareness among journalists, which is also kind of an educational part. But I think before we say, or before we can do something about this very, very powerful hate ideology, we need to understand how it actually occurs. And that's, I think, the most important aspect. That's why I said at the beginning of the talk, the political actors, multipliers, they need to understand that, yeah, we need to take that seriously. Not only because online discourse has an effect on Jewish communities, but the positive thing about social media is that we can illuminate what's happening in our societies now in a way that could have never happened in the history of the West or humanity. Because, you know, private discourse was something we didn't have any access to. Now, since everything is moving towards the online realm, this looks different. And as long as this doesn't lead to 1984, it can be used in a very, very good way, and can help different institutions to immunize future generations when it comes to this kind of exclusion and demonization. Yeah, sorry, long answer.
No, thank you. That was great. Stefani has written in the chat, what about explicit anti-Semitic content and implicit communication? She means the use of anti-Semitic tropes that people are not aware of or do not use to address anti-Semitic communication. Is there any way to detect that?
Well, I mean, what we really try to do, of course, is we try to focus on implicit communication, right? And with implicit, I really mean the linguistic term of it. When we talk about, for instance, unconscious forms, it doesn't really matter because we don't, as corpus linguists, pragma linguists, we are not interested in the intent behind a statement, because very often when we look into a verbal anti-Semitism, which comes up in all sorts of situations, it's very often uttered unconsciously. So, but there are ways to measure it. That's also what we try to do with the lexicon, which will be published in February, to see what is actually uttered. What are the, as a linguist, I would call it a reference potential, which means the words and phrases and argumentation that is actually presented in the web comment. And the inference potential or inference potential would be what kind of associations would you, as a person growing up in Britain, have with that? For instance, I mentioned the term allusion. What does the term ghetto, for instance, trigger? When we talk about an Italian web user or a German web user, I mean, there are different associations with that term. I would say in Germany, it's pretty clear that the term ghetto, when we talk about the Gaza Strip, immediately activates the scenario or the interpretation that Israel is the new Nazi state. In other contexts, the word ghetto can mean something else or can associate something different, depending on the nation's history and what is prominent in public discourse and the collective memory. So this there we need to tread very carefully. But what we try to do, of course, is to get a really proper overview of implicitness in all language when it comes to all language communities we are interested in, but take into account that there will still be a gray area. For instance, the sentence "Soros is an evil banker." It's not really clear if it really refers to Soros's Jewish background or his checkered history as an investment banker. So there are gray areas that will always remain. But this gray area is much smaller than people might think. And I think pragmatic linguistics is a very good way to address that topic.
Lawrence has pointed out some of the anti-Semitic incidents in France. I'm not sure that's a question, Lawrence. Feel free to jump in if you want to ask on that. But he's also asked, how can I register to your newsletter? If that was a reference to...
okay, how you can, well, it's pretty simple. When you just go to the website, just scroll down, and there you can type in your email address, and then everything is sorted. It's pretty straightforward. Also, if you want to have a look at what we did so far in the news section or publications, you get an overview also of the short version of our guidebook, and the tools we use, and you have, of course, all discourse reports, and the preliminary study that I referred to for October 7th can also be downloaded. You will find it in the news section. So yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. And I didn't understand the previous question with regard to the anti-Semitic acts in France.
Yes, there was just a comment.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether it was a question or a comment, but Lawrence pointed out that there's been no new data for almost 2 weeks now. Yeah, Lawrence, if you want to jump in, feel free. But if not, that may have just been a comment. Oh, yeah. So, Lawrence, I'll allow you to talk. You can. You unmute yourself. Feel free to talk.
And also, since the education part was mentioned, there will be also some events in the close future in Britain, also online events, if you are interested in that, you know, how to address anti-Semitism in classrooms based on the results from social media studies. Feel free to check out the website. There will be some event probably already next week. We still need to figure it out. But yeah, if you want to know how these two arenas, like research, the way we do it, and education can be connected, there will be lots of ways to learn about this. Thank you.
So Lawrence, feel free.
Yes, I'm here, but can you hear me?
Hi.
Yeah,
yes, we hear you.
Hello. Hi. I just made a comment about France because you were showing that the anti-Semitic acts were more numerous in UK than France and Germany together.
Yeah.
And
but
what I found out, I've been looking every day to the I live in Paris. I've been checking every day on the anti-Semitic acts in France, and until they gave the numbers until November 14th, there were 18 acts since 7th of October, and then they stopped giving the numbers because probably they were growing too quickly and didn't want maybe to be too frightening. And comparing to 2022, the acts were in 1 year 436.
Yeah.
So it's been quite huge in 6 weeks. It's been very, very big.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. No, but you have to see one point. This is absolutely true, and it's funny because I was based in Paris until end of October, and I know pretty well what you're talking about. But these are statistics about anti-Semitic incidents offline, like attacks and Magen David on the walls of houses and all that. So what we do is we just look as social media researchers. We just look into social media and what we can see there. And even there, you just need to take into account that it's absolutely, these numbers shouldn't tell anyone that Germany has a smaller problem with anti-Semitism than the UK. That's not what we are saying. It's still a small portion of online discourse, because what we do is we always start with a qualitative approach. And even though we have 25 people working in the project, which is big for a research project, sometimes usually it's much smaller. But of course, we can't take all these developments online into account. So therefore, our data sets are limited. They are very often, they're just focusing on mainstream discourse. Still, when it comes to these, for instance, the 11,000 comments we looked at in the context of October 7th, they have a value of representativeness. But you can only say something reliable about the overall presence of anti-Semitism when we actually have better classifiers, when we actually have better large language models. But this will take time. So far, when you look at the sheer amount of irony or rhetorical questions, or again, these semantic gaps I was referring to, large language models, they are pretty good in comparison to 2019. But there's a long way to go till they understand how we as human beings express ideas, and particularly a hate ideology like anti-Semitism. And therefore, we still don't know properly where we stand at the moment. It's a work in progress, globally speaking, because we do make some progress in the field of artificial intelligence, but language is just very complex.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We are running out of time, but Excellence has one question, and Jonathan also asked for one quick clarification. Could you mention again the source for that research about taking factors out, like capitalism, to simplify complex issues?
Oh yeah, well, this is a good question. So there's, for instance, I mean, I can definitely share a couple of articles later on that could be forwarded. It's a big topic. I mentioned Karin Stöckner, who wrote a lot about this. There's also a very good introduction by Stefan Griegard. But even when you look at the book Triads of Diaspora, which is kind of the Bible of anti-Semitism studies, Bible in this context sounds weird, in Britain, there you have a lot of references to this particular topic. So in order to keep it short, since we are running out of time, I would suggest that I just send a couple of really good introductory texts that illuminate this kind of connection, if that's all right.
Perfect. Yes, thank you, Jonathan. We'll be in touch. You can put your email into the chat for the hosts and panelists.
Yeah, you can even see my email. Oh yeah, or like this.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can.
Or send directly to Matthias. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, the one last question to Excellence. I will allow you to talk. If you just unmute yourself, then I should be able to hear you.
Hello, am I
Yeah,
audible?
we can hear you.
Okay.
Hi.
All right. So my name is Excellence. Joining from Cameroon. Mm-hmm. And I thank ISGAP for this opportunity and for this session especially. Now, first, we had a plan and still do have that plan for a first independent regional consultation on anti-Semitism in Africa. And we had designed this for August of next year. And we had quite very progressive conversations with the different partners and stakeholders. Now, I bring this up because of this particular title of this discussion today. After the October 7th and the justifiable response of Israel, very many of the partners and other stakeholders and interest parties have either pulled off or developed cold feet or are not just as forthright as they have always been. It leaves me with a lot of questions as a person. The whole world watched 9/11, and any response America took as a result of that was justified. There was no question. Now, at the backyard of another country called Israel, just because it is called Israel, you take a response to keep your people safe, to keep your country safe, and very many other consequences are following, even to good initiatives. So, one question that has been bothering my little mind is this: will the world ever come to the point of judging Israel fairly? And if the answer is no, how will Israel and friends of Israel respond? It has been a worry because even online, the few online the channels that we have that we are discussing with, the responses have been very vague, very very unsupportive, and very unfair. So will there be any point that the world would come to judge Israel fairly? Okay, thank you. These were just my comments and perhaps my question or worry. If you have a comment, fine. If you don't, it is okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this is a big question, but I think I won't be able to respond to it because I don't know. I mean, this is of course a hope I have. You can see this phenomenon you were describing, the response from different players to the October 7th massacre is of course something you can find on various levels. Not only when we talk about the political level, but of course also in the field of like my field, university, what's happening on campuses, what's happening with the cooperations with Israeli universities, and of course the art world, which is something I didn't really take seriously for a long time, the anti-Israel narrative in the art world, but already in May 2021, this changed quickly. And when you look at, for instance, film festivals or some other areas where actually people do present their work, you very often come across the observation that Israeli artists cannot show their work anymore, that all Israeli movies are taken out of the program. And so it's something that you can find in various milieux, in various contexts, and it's heartbreaking. I think in the close future, this is definitely not realistic that this will change in any way. It all has to do also with narratives, hegemonic narratives in the media, and of course how institutions like the United Nations react to this. But what we could see how the United Nations reacted to October 7th, and for instance also the obvious misogynistic brutality you could see there is, as one example, is it's extremely scary and disappointing. And I can't really give you an answer. I just hope that over like long-term understanding of anti-Semitism, this can change. But since we talk about global phenomena, it is highly improbable that this will change at any point in the close future. Sorry, this is not another very optimistic final statement, but I wouldn't know how to put it differently.
Well, thank you so much, Matthias, for that really interesting and informative seminar. And thank you everyone for joining. Our next one's on December 6th. I've put the link to register in the chat if anyone's interested. Yeah, thank you so much, and hope you'll have a good rest of your days wherever you are.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
It was
Bye.
a pleasure. Bye-bye.